Hello, this is another briefing from the Death of Black America. Today we will discuss the rise of Pookie and Ray Ray, which is a new phenomenon. Actually, it's not very new, but the manifestation of it is quite new. And we're going to discuss the background and history and the origins of Pookie and Ray Ray. According to the Urban Dictionary, what is a Pookie and a Ray Ray? It's a generalized broad term that describes societal nonconformists, usually ex-convicts, jobless and faithful, ghetto dregs, incapable of social graces, commitment, or gainful employment, the absentee father, baby daddy of unwed mothers, the inmate population, the drug dealers, and the hustlers in the streets are examples of Pookies and Ray Rays. And now there's a move within the Black manosphere, Black community in general, to really call that out. And there's a lot of frustration with it from Black women, especially, and now from upwardly mobile or progressive minded or more conservative Black men. And so I wanted to use an Urban Dictionary definition, not more of a white term or a sanitized version of it, to discuss this phenomenon now of Black manhood. And then within this, you have the Pookie and Ray Ray fantasy, the pseudo-Black masculinity. The first slide shows the more realistic version of Pookie and Ray Ray. Kind of scrawny, not very refined looking, not very attractive looking, but just basically, the bottom of the barrel kind of dudes. They hustle, they're tatted up. They may be affiliated with gangs or cliques. The sagging pants are a good attribute of that, usually some derivative of being in prison or prison culture. And so essentially it's become the dominant culture at this point. And these two pictures here are generally what you're going to see on a day-to-day basis. And this is the first source of frustration within the Black community. And these are also the scapegoats for the white community with their war on drugs, tough on crime initiatives, super predator, buzzwords all come from this. Now, this is what we see on a day-to-day basis, but there's a stylized version, there's a fantasy version of Pookie and Ray Ray. And these guys kind of take that, but at least two, the one in the middle and the one on the right, are real prisoners. The one on the left, it could be just a model. But this is the fantasy that's fed to the Black community for what Black masculinity looks like. It's a pseudo-Black masculinity. I talked about that in my last briefing, where it's a cannibalistic form of masculinity. And you want to use the word misogyny, it's usually steeped in misogyny, because these types of guys are not designed to provide and protect a community. They're just not built for it, they're not developed for it. And so the gentleman in the middle, Jeremy Meeks, was in for murder charges. He had hit the genetic lottery, was able to get out of that based on his prison bay photos where a lot of women fell in love with him, and he ended up getting a modeling contract and gotten out of the lifestyle. Gentleman on the left, apparently he's probably still locked up, and the gentleman on the left probably is too. But that muscle-bound, brute, stud Negro, athlete, pretty boy persona wrapped in a Pookie and Ray Ray is what is now seen as coveted pseudo-Black masculinity within by Black males and also by Black females, and that's one of the problems within the community. But this fantasy is to our detriment, and this is one of the problems I wanted to discuss today, because this is essentially bullshit that we're looking at right here. It's all flex, it's all front, and these are the men that basically become the poster children for Black males around the country and around. So now there's a new movement among Black women to call out the inability of Black men to protect and provide. And when they think of that, this is what they envision, this is what they see. They don't see the myriad of other Black males out there, but they always see Pookie and Ray Ray, that's a scapegoat. And we need to differentiate between Pookie and Ray Ray and productive Black men. And we haven't. We've put everyone's lumped together into one group, and you take the heat that's put upon you or stereotyped on you, regardless of how you're really carrying yourself, what you're doing in your life. So these negative stereotypes get perpetuated and stuck to any Black male trying to make forward progress in his life. So the Black male reality in America, um, and this leads to that stereotype, leads to the reinforcement of the Black male reality in America. On many social and economic measures, and this is from the Brookings Institute of Challenges Facing Black Men, published November 19th, 2020, by Richard Reeves, Sarah Nazu, and Ember Smith. I'm going to just read it. On many social and economic measures, Black men fare worse, not only than Black men, but white and Black women, as we shown above. I just took this out for emphasis. Part of the cause is the Black men are uniquely stigmatized, according to studies of implicit bias conducted by political scientists Ishmael White and Corey McConaughey. More than 40% of white respondents rank many or almost all Black men as violent, inherently violent. White men are less than half as likely to be described in this way at about the same rate as Black women, while white women are very unlikely to be labeled as violent. It's no surprise then that Black men are also more likely to be stopped by police, more likely to be frisked, and more likely to be arrested, more likely to be convicted, and more likely to be killed by law enforcement. This is the reality that Pookie and Ray Ray reinforces. This is the reality that most Black men that are productive are competing against through either exceptional behavior, trying to be a model minority, trying to, the talented 10th. Well, there are a bunch of different names for it, to trying to work your way out of a stereotype to show you're not like the others. It really doesn't work. And so we have to internally with our community change our own narrative of what we see as masculinity before this will change. And we have to control that tightly. Now, the historical roots of Pookie and Ray Ray go back to the Sambo character. The Sambo character was a stereotype of Black men who were considered very happy, usually lazy, irresponsible, or carefree. Looking at the Sambo, the Jim Crow era Sambo, and then there's the Black Brute in the middle, and then there's the Chicken Thief. So it's the Pookie and Ray Ray is a fusion, a combo of these. And this all started prior to the Civil War and during slavery, but got reinforced during Reconstruction and Jim Crow to justify racial segregation and harsher policing and the harsher treatment of Black men because of the idea that we are inherently violent, inherently uncontrollable, inherently undisciplined, and that they need a strong hand to manage and control so that they don't run roughshod over the population. And this is where the historical roots of Pookie and Ray Ray now that also feeds into the idea that policing needs to be harder, more broader, and it needs to be enacted strongly and enforced with a harsh hand. So it's like, hence George Floyd, the gentleman that was Neely that was killed just the other day on the train in New York. He was a little guy, but he was seen as a threat and choked out to death. And other Black males that have been shot over the years because someone felt threatened. So this is where that comes from, and people don't realize the historical reinforcement that Pookie and Ray Ray has on a much longer, deeper historical narrative of the Sambo character of the Black Brute. So Pookie is a modern fusion of the Black Sambo and the Black Brute. And so these pictures here from the far left were from the early 1900s when we had actually white men and blackface characters, and caricatures were drawn about the Sambo, and supposed to be a foreboding, dark-skinned, brutish Black man, the one with the hat on, almost like a street thug. The next one is the Black Brute, is more of an ape-like character that again was reinforced with the white, the lily white female that needs to be protected because the Brute is going to come for her at any time and ravish her. And then you see the LeBron James photo that reinforces the same in the collective unconscious, the Black Brute and the Black Sambo, identity or stereotype within the collective unconscious. This feeds into the implicit bias that the Brookings article spoke to. These things, these images are burned into people's psyche, and that becomes part of implicit bias. Once you're burned, it's really unconscious, and the only way to overcome it is to understand what you're looking at and how it may affect you. And most people aren't going to do the work to really think about, you know, nonverbal images, visual images that impact how they see people and the imprinting that it takes. And LeBron's photo here basically helps reinforce the black Sambo narrative of wanting a white woman. This is this big, foreboding brute that's going to be a problem. He's got the basketball and it's kind of disarming, but it's essentially the same thing here with the destroy the bad black brute. That's a buzzword for policing, self-protection, the gun movement. You got to keep your weapons. Americans feel like they have to stay armed to manage this black male, quote unquote, historically slave population that is inherently violent, inherently evil, inherently undisciplined, inherently of low intelligence. And these images and reinforcement of those images give rise to, on the right, the Ray Rays and Pookies with the sagging pants, and then the prison thug, who again is a very muscular guy, because that's what we push as a sign of masculinity, as being, buff, strong, which is again goes back to slave breeding, creating a black brute or a stud Negro. And then you've got, the street urchin type, and above that, none of those guys are particularly built, but they still have the same aura persona of the character on the far right with the hat on with the swag. So you see how Pookie and Ray Ray is a modern fusion of the Black Sambo and the Black Brute. And it's all burned into our collective unconsciousness. We don't even think about it. It's just, it's just part of, it's taken as fact at this point. And now we've developed into a dominant culture, pseudo culture, Black masculinity and patriarchy of Pookie and Ray Ray. And when we deal with Black female and white male pushback on Black male culture with hip hop, violence, crime, this is what they see. This is what they visualize. This happened in the 90s. These pictures, the gang culture came up in the 80s and 90s. Pookie and Ray Ray didn't really technically exist then. I've been hearing about it the last 20 years, but always the idea of the thug or the brute. And this really came about. It's always been a street element because it's all we were left with within marginalized communities, is street culture, hustling, making a living however you could. This really became stronger in the 1970s. With the drug game coming in strong in the 70s and 80s, and it just blew up. And then it got embellished with our music, which originally was protest music, revolution music. It just essentially evolved into celebrations of ghetto culture at this point. And that's how hip hop culture kind of got overtaken by a Pookie and Ray Ray, persona. And then the idea of the pseudo Black masculinity, the hyper masculine, hyper violent, is seen as masculine instead of a measured, controlled individual that can protect and provide, but also has the self-control to know when to enact violence, protect and provide before that community and people around them, not the cannibalistic identity that we currently have. So, and this is what I'm talking about. Pseudo-Black masculinity has been promoted by media from 1970 up until today. We've all watched the movies of from the early 70s with the Blaxploitation movies, with the Pimpology coming out, Iceberg Slim's book about that got pushed out. Jim Brown and some of the other movies that came out of that ilk of Bad Black Jack or whatever. There was a bunch of them that came out, but they're low budget movies that pushed out a pseudo Black masculinity, a hyper masculine version, a misogynistic version of masculinity. And so that trickled on down over the last 30, 40 years. And then in the 90s and the 2000s, we had the story got pushed, within our own community with the music of Gotta Get a Roughneck or Soldier or No Scrubs. From 1970 and down until today, you also notice that that was also really the start of the war on poverty, the welfare campaign that separated Black men from Black households. And the single parent household rose from there, where we were probably in the 60s, probably 70% of Black families were two parent households. To today, we're between 69% and 70% out of wedlock births. It's interesting how you can track that over the exact time frame of the last 50 odd years of the rise of pseudo Black masculinity, Pookie and Ray Ray culture, thug culture, and the climbing of the out of wedlock births of the Black community and the push for no scrubs, which leads into, again, downplaying or not celebrating individuals that actually do what they need to do without cannibalizing the community. Those that are not hyper masculine but also productive was also seen as a negative, and that permeated the thinking of a lot of women in the community now to see what they think of as masculinity. And that's one of the problems we have today. It's permeated in our society, and we see it across the board within hip hop culture, Black culture, and our larger dominant culture. And now there's a pushback among educated Black females that are reacting to that because they can't find viable males that can protect and provide on their level. So, and the big issue with this is the female mating selection and the socialization rewards Pookies and Ray Rays. And the document here is from Rollo Tomasi, The Rational Male, and it talks about peak sexual marketplace value of men and women. And in this, I put the pictures in of the type of males that get rewarded during different phases of a woman's life. From age 15 to 25, which is a woman's physical peak, to about 30, Pookie and Ray Ray, the physical alpha male is typically the choice of women in that age group. There may be swagger, it may be socialization, but that is seen as masculine. That is what they physiologically react to. And so the women, Black women, are wasting their prime years with Pookies and Ray Rays, and then thus having out of wedlock births, bad relationships, unbalanced relationships. And so around 30, there's a pivot because the woman goes from wanting a physical alpha male to an economic alpha male. And that's at that point where you see the blue arch or the blue curve is where males start to hit their peak market, sexual marketplace value. It's about 35, 36. Also, it's when we start to hit our highest earning potential, and it just goes up from there for most men that are productive. That's where women try to pivot. And so that's also why I put in Russell Wilson in Future here, because Sierra is an example. She spent her best years with men like Future. That's what she spent 10 years of her life with. And then in her early 30s, she pivots to an economic alpha male that probably not her physiological response type, but that's what she picked for the security and income that comes with that. This is what a lot of Black men are reacting to. But women have to understand you cannot reward bad behavior, but that's what's been happening for the last 50 years. Women have been rewarding bad behavior, non-productive men, or the illusion of productivity with flexing and stuff. And so you have now more productive men that are opting out of marriage and relationships because they're not getting the value that they would see that they should be getting for what they provide. So that's one of the issues. So female mating selection has to change. The female mating selection rewards Pookies and Ray Rays. You can use this chart, just give credit to Rollo Tomasi for it, and just look at every woman has a story of wasting 10 years with a Pookie and Ray Ray, a couple kids, STD infections, bad credit, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and then just stress. And then around 30, I need a different kind of man. It could be a white man, it could be a simp, as you want to call it, or just a corny Black dude. But there's always that pivot. And that's the issue that Black women are having today is by the time you want to pivot, the guys that are seasoned, that are what you would call corny or high producers, aren't really checking for a woman that's basically giving her best years to Pookie and Ray Ray. They're just not doing it. They don't feel like that's a reward to get the the latter part of a woman's prime physical years. Because that's what at the end of the day men value: appearance, personality, fitness, and all that comes in with the health concerns, the looks, all that comes in. So and just to speak to that, when you think about it, within the population, you can any general man in their 30s can, when they're meeting women, can assume 30% of the women they're meeting, if not higher, has an incurable STD at this point of some sort. And so that's something you have to take into account. Could be herpes, could be um, human papillomavirus, just something they can't get rid of, or something that's impacted their fertility or their fitness. And so, and then also the emotional toll that comes from dealing with a toxic relationship for anywhere from a few months to a few years, depending on how toxic that Pookie or Ray Ray was to her. So what happened? And why did we get here? And the biggest part of that is overt and subversive warfare on the Black warrior class. I'm going to go from left to right. We had maroon communities, we had slave revolts, and we had real alpha males that tried to rise up and actually free people, free themselves, free their families. And typically some got free, some didn't. Some set up maroon communities in the US, but they were always very small because they were typically put down. And typically if those males were captured, they were hung and then dismembered. That's just the standard thing. Next, that kept evolving. And then the next real overt warrior class were the Black Panthers. And that came up in the 60s. They were dealt with, they were kind of the counterpoint to the Ku Klux Klan at that point, who were an armed group meant to keep Black people down in the Deep South and voter suppression, stuff like that. The Black Panthers evolved in more urban areas to deal with the urban issues that were coming up at the time, with redlining, economic disenfranchisement, lack of ownership, lack of resources, that stuff. And that was to counter the Ku Klux Klan. Now, going back to the Redeemer movement, typically, in slavery, the slave patrollers and Redeemer movement after the Civil War were the individuals, most generally any able-bodied white men, participating in keeping the Black male population managed and controlled through very, very violent means. And then that evolved in the Ku Klux Klan. And at that point, that moved to transition us into the 60s with the Black Panther Party. At that time, the Ku Klux Klan became somewhat of a threat to the US government. So at that time, in the 1960s, the Klan kind of dovetailed away from that to just general voter suppression in the South. At that point, COINTELPRO popped up, and that's where the FBI and local police departments, infused with Klan members or other racist and individuals within it, to subvert the Black male leadership within the community and actually execute them and kill them. And that was the idea. So within COINTELPRO, that was what was done in the 60s and 70s, which led us to the 1970s. And that's why I have Tupac and his mother there. Tupac was raised by his mother to be warrior class. That was one of the reasons, even though he had natural charisma, she raised him to be an alpha male, to be a thought leader, to be a leader, provider, protector. Even though he didn't get everything he needed, she gave him like the basic framework for that. And he was a very strong individual, very focused individual, very intelligent individual, which was a threat to the white power base. And so COINTELPRO extended out, and I've just been watching his documentary, Dear Mama. You can tell there were COINTELPRO operations committed against his mother while she was raising him, also against him as the offspring of Black Panthers, and as a possible Black Messiah or a thought leader within the Black community. So as you watch that documentary, notice how the police started to harass him as he became much more well known within the Bay Area and nationally, and as kind of how he carried himself with actually protecting or stepping up to defend Black people in the Black community, which ended up getting him into some court cases because he wasn't afraid to step up and defend. And that's actually what got him killed. Typically, Black mothers raise their sons to be very passive as a defense mechanism because they don't want a Black male that will have direct confrontation with the white power base because it'll generally get them killed or put in jail. Those males that, that's why we have the prison industrial politics. A lot of people with leadership potential, a lot of abilities get funneled to the prison industrial complex early because you don't want organic Black leadership, male leadership to bubble up and start to take control. So that was one of the things I noticed from that documentary was the effects of COINTELPRO on himself and his mother. And leading him from COINTELPRO, the systematic components of depressing a Black warrior class and the rise of Pookie and Ray Rays education, where Black males are funneled into special education, they're put on Ritalin faster, they are suspended faster, they're expelled faster than white males. And then that caveats into the media, music, and film, and the economics of it, because drug culture became the new employer in the 70s and 80s for Black males. And then music business, which, personified or celebrated the gangster culture and pseudo Black masculinity, the whole, even though some of it was meant to, throw a light on it to kind of downplay it or ask for change, it actually celebrated it into a certain way to a culture that doesn't have much to celebrate. This also then reinforced the policing and Black community reinforcement of Pookie and Ray Ray as this is Black masculinity, this is how it reacts, and essentially this is a negative thing. When you don't have a healthy Black male patriarchy and men to guide young men like Tupac and give them what they need to show them how to be measured and controlled and strategic, this is what you get. You get Pookies and Ray Rays at this point. So my solution is to reestablish the Black male patriarchy. And I'll walk through each of these as in future briefs just to discuss. But the first one is a new Black male code of conduct and reinforcement. I've noticed that a lot of Black males bum rush each other. They don't fight toe to toe like they used to. They go to guns because they're afraid of being embarrassed from getting beat in a fight. So what is happening is that two guys have a beef. One of the guys waits for an opportunity where that one individual is alone and he brings 2, 3, 4 of his boys and they just swarm the kid and beat him up instead of coming up to him like men or young men, stating what the beef is. If you want to square up like men and let those two fight it out. So no one dies. No one goes to the hospital, but you establish boundaries and you got a certain amount of respect out of that. We no longer have that when we need to establish that how we engage and interact with each other. So we're not always testing each other, seeing each other as threats when we don't need to be. Number 2 is develop and socialize a new Black male persona. The Pookie and Ray Ray nigga persona has to die out. It's got to go away. And right now it's still running strong. And so that's something that we have to kind of put forward, that this is what we want our image to be and tightly control it. Number 3 is Black male accountability councils for adult men, where, it's a group discussion groups where men can come and speak about what's going on in their lives, what they're dealing with, get held accountable for the bullshit they pull, for the things they do well, applauded, for the things they need help on. They get insight from the other men in the room because we don't have that anymore. Next is a Black male rites of passage development for boys ages 7 to 18. It's a long process, I get it, but it takes a long ass time to develop a productive Black male of any type, blue collar, white collar, whatever you want to call it. It takes years to develop a healthy Black patriarchy that knows how to respond to stress, to physical threats, to social threats, emotional. There's so many things to it, and I'll speak about that for future briefs. Next one is a Black economic ecosystem with Black financing institutions. Currently, our money is still flowing out of the Black community. It doesn't circulate. We don't finance ourselves with like susus as the Indians and Asians do, and actually Jewish Americans do. They self-finance a lot of their own operations. We typically still extract wealth from our community and then go and try to integrate into white communities out of a need for self-safety and also for the idea of white acceptance. We also need R&D institutions, which are research and development institutions, think tanks, science and research development groups that work on things that are not just business related, but things that can help improve the overall quality of life of the Black community, since we are dispersed and distributed community all over in little pockets all over the country. The next one is business development initiatives, where that Black ecosystem and financing allows us to actually push out and actually develop, business development and gain market share of different avenues that we haven't looked at yet, even government contracting of state, federal, local level contracts, and actually partner and get a bigger piece of the pie and actually employ ourselves. And then finally, after that is active and passive investment training and strategies, so that the money we make from numbers 5, 6, 7 actually go into income streams or investments that create passive incomes that become dynastic in a way that you've got generational wealth, or as a group, systematic wealth that we can self-finance. So we're not always, looking for handouts, looking for donations, so that we can make moves as needed for the benefit of the Black community. So that's all I have for this one. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.